Hey, what's up, everybody? This is your host, Irvin, along with the amazing, legendary RPG co host in this situation, Mark Dudley. And this is Shining Spotlight, the stream where we highlight the creatives in the industry in order to inspire you guys. Today, we have an accomplished creative with many years of experience under his belt in comics. He is an Eisner nominated for multiple Eisner Awards. And there's also some of his projects you may know about, like Akiko and Brody's Ghost. There's a lot more, of course. He also has taught many people through YouTube, where he's amassed over 3 million subscribers as of this recording. And as a result, he's even created books like Mastering Manga, which is like a how-to book. The list goes on. But today, we welcome the great Mark Crilley to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun, and thanks for all those kind words.
Well, I mean, one thing I really like, of course, is that, this is just kind of, I don't know if you could just say, feels good being someone from Michigan and knowing that there's also a very accomplished creator also from Michigan as yourself. I would like to know, so when you started on your journey, of course, you lived in Japan at one point. What inspired you? And I'm sure you talked about this numerous times, but just for our audience, those out there, who may not know,
Sure.
What inspired you to actually do manga specifically?
All right. Well, yeah, I was living in Japan around 1991 to 1993 and teaching English as my full-time job. But I'd always loved drawing. I majored in art when I was in college. Of course, they didn't have any classes on how to make comic books, so I had to just sort of figure that out on my own. But I thought I could make my classes more interesting for myself if I started to create a comic book story week by week, and I would bring the class my latest page at the rate of about 1 page per week, and we'd read through that page and see if there was anything teachable in relation to the English language. But really what it allowed me was to have a kind of captive audience that would motivate me to keep working on this comic book. And once I finished that first one, which was kind of a silly one called The Beast That Ate Morioka, I realized I needed to do a second one where I took it more seriously. And if I played my cards right and made it very professional looking, maybe I could get it published later on. And, since this is a video recording, I do have a copy of some of the artwork that I did at that time. And I believe that I had this photocopied at the size that I actually created this work. So this is how it all began. And I was, week by week creating page after page of this story called Akiko on the Planet Smooth. And so I think right from the beginning, the Japanese style was sort of baked into what I was doing. I wasn't 100% trying to create a manga, but I was getting some manga influences for sure. Sure. And I was sort of weaving that in, combining that with my own style. And yeah, sure enough, luckily that first comic that I made that was only 33 pages long, it turned out to be what I needed in terms of getting my foot in the door of the American comic book industry a few years down the line.
Now, what did that look like back in those days? Because I know at some point the comic book industry, especially like in the 90s, for example, was facing, a big change, because of course you had the speculator boom that happened at that time. What did that look like for you at that time being in the industry?
Yeah, it's funny that you should bring that up. I haven't thought about this stuff for a while, but yeah, I was at the same time. I was like a deer in the headlights. I was this guy who didn't know anything. I didn't know the context of the industry that I was heading into. I just remembered from when I was a kid in the 70s reading, mostly DC comics and stuff like that. And I thought, well, this is going to be fun. I'm going into the American comic book industry. And then once I got to going to these conventions, I was mainly led into the business by way of Sirius Entertainment and Rob Horan, who I know Mark
funny.
knew back in the day, and they sort of, they guided me into things, and they sort of got me up to speed on this. Like you were saying, that the industry was in a bad place. There had been this boom followed by a bust, and I sort of felt like I had climbed onto a sinking ship or something for a couple of years there.
Right.
And I was very lucky because without knowing it, I had created an all ages property that was just what this publisher was looking for. And I think in a way, it was a lot of people in the industry were looking for more of this all ages type material. Bone was a huge success, and I feel like I came along, in the wake of Bone and maybe one or two other all ages comics that were out at that time. And I think that's why I got so many of those Eisner Award nominations, to be honest, that they wanted to encourage my comic. They wanted to see it succeed. So that was all just a luck, really. It dropped into my lap, that sort of circumstance. But it was an interesting time. People nowadays wouldn't believe it, but I remember being in Chicago at the height of Marvel's troubles, when Marvel kind of had its back against the wall and they were having to sell Spider-Man to make some money and so forth. And I remember there was, the Marvel presence at this convention. I think it was the Wizard World in Chicago.
Yeah, we're at the Rosemont. Yeah.
It was like one or two folding tables or something. It was unbelievably humble. And I was like, oh man, Marvel really is in trouble. But of course, we all saw how they turned that around. But yeah, you've reminded me of those days. It was certainly an interesting time to join the comic.
And what does Chinese say? The Chinese curse will make you live in interesting times.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I lived in very interesting times indeed. But in a way, I feel like Akiko was almost off on its own side of things, and it wasn't affected so much by the turmoil of that sort of investor boom and bust crisis.
So I see it's funny because you and we're kind of like on the same path in terms of trying to be positive influence from an educational standpoint.
Yeah.
How did you what was your journey into being an educator? I know you just talked a little bit about you teaching English in Japan. One of our other editors, he did that too. Jeff Lilly, he taught English in Japan and stuff too, right?
Oh, great.
So having that in your background, what kind of made you decide to start doing the YouTube videos?
Okay, well, that's another thing that sort of fell into my lap by accident. Like I said, or like you just said, I was an English teacher for almost 5 years in Japan and Taiwan. So I sort of had that in my DNA. But then my son, who was only like 7 or 8 years old, introduced me to YouTube, and I'm indebted to him because it was very early days. This was YouTube was just starting out, and I decided to start trying to hype up my new comic book series called Miki Falls.
Right.
And so I started making YouTube videos and showing the artwork and thinking, well, this could be like an advertisement, maybe get the word out, help with the sales and so forth. Well, like anybody else, my videos would get 10 or 15 views, and that would be the end of it. But then one day I did a video where I pointed the camera at the page as I continued working on it, and I was adding lines and maybe talking just a little bit about, here's my advice to you guys and so forth. And that one got hundreds of views. Maybe it climbed up to like 1,000 views or something. And I thought, oh, they like it when I draw. They like it when they see the process, So that's what I started doing pretty much for all my videos. And it was just this wonderful thing that happened. And I noticed that people all over the world eventually were watching these videos, and it allowed me to build that crucial audience on YouTube, and then also to just have that great feeling of being a mentor, sort of a long distance mentor. I think people growing up today, they don't really know that, pre-internet days or even in the early days of the internet, the drawing process remained mysterious. You know, you saw the final beautiful work, but you didn't tend to have a chance to see what went into the creation of that. And I do think that that was a new thing, and people were like, wow, I can actually watch him make this drawing. There weren't so many opportunities like that back then, and I think that was a big part of how I lucked into, you know, eventually 1 million, and then 2 million and 3 million followers or subscribers on YouTube.
Well, then you helped out a lot of people. I often talk to Irvin and those guys about how I usually look at the original English language manga progression in stages. So like there's stage 1, which was the Studio Proteus guys back in the day, and our Studio Iron Cat and stuff like that, right? Maybe even some of the stuff that was going on in the 80s, you know, back when Comico was bringing Robotech over, and you know, stuff like that. And when Adam Warren was doing what he was doing with Dirty Pair, that's like phase 1. Phase 2 is, you know, like when Tokyo Pop and them, and back before they were Tokyo Pop, mixed comics and stuff and all that, right? So I try to give them a historical context, right? And so in that historical context, a lot of times what I kind of notice is that, you know, after the debacle with Tokyo Pop, you know, a lot of people kind of, you know, took their ball and went home. And so I think that you really inspired this newer generation because you didn't take your ball and go home. So, you know, it's just interesting about how that works out.
Yeah, well, now you're making me aware of something that I wasn't even so clued into, the fact that that I never fell in with Tokyo Pop and was sort of distant from that whole world. I suppose that worked out to be in my favor, because what happened with me is that my comic book was seen by Random House Children's Books, and they invited me to turn my comic book into a series of young reader novels. And actually, this piece of artwork here, I might as well show, was what I created when that opportunity came my way around the year 2000. This is the original artwork for that first book that I did, that was published by Random House. So at that moment, I ended up heading into the mainstream publishing world, right? Random House and HarperCollins and people like that. And I almost kind of left the American comic industry for a few years there, until Dark Horse, bless their hearts, they gave me the chance to do Brody's Ghost, and that kind of brought me back in. But yeah, I was not really aware of that pathway in the way that you are, Mark, of what happened, you know, the sort of speed bumps along the way in the development of the American original English language manga world.
So I guess what I would, just to even like jump straight into that particular topic of original English language manga, like, and this is not to box in any of your work, because I've noticed that your work has actually, I've noticed different even art styles, you know, like it's evolved over time. You know, even when I look at, you know, if I even pull this up right here, I look at like, you know, Akiko, you know, or I look at Brody's Ghost, for example, very different, you know, in the way that you tackled that, very different.
Thank you.
So like, what does that, like, what do you consider any of your work to fall into the category of original English manga, or do you consider it to be something else? Because I don't want to box you in it anywhere.
Yeah, you know, I think when I was doing Miki Falls, and this was kind of during a boom of manga in the local bookstores, like the Barnes and Noble, and, you know, Borders was still doing okay in those days. And I noticed, you know, shelf after shelf of manga. And I thought, boy, if I call my new project a manga, maybe I can get more people to give it a chance, you know. So I started calling it a manga, but I don't think, you know, certainly Miki Falls did not qualify, because it was a hybrid of my style combined with little touches of manga style. Sure. Now with Brody's Ghost, I did try to go a little farther and get a little more authentic. I was especially looking at Death Note very carefully. And I was sort of, you know, I wasn't going to rip off the style of Death Note, but I sort of modeled the facial proportions of my characters off of some of the characters in that series. And in that way, I felt that I could have characters that looked, it had a look that would appeal to people who took manga very seriously. Now, even saying that, I don't think Brody's Ghost quite qualifies as an original English language manga, but I think it gets a little closer to being that. I have seen the people who create, American artists who create manga that looks so close to what you see in, published in Tokyo, that it blows my mind. And, hats off to those people, because I don't think I could do it even if I tried. I can, you were talking about my how to draw books. Let me see if I can grab one of those, because when you talk about authenticity, oh yeah, look at that. You flashed it on and I got the book right here. We did not plan this, people. It just happened. But this is me trying my best to create something that looks as if it could have been drawn by a Japanese artist in Japan. And let me see if I can find, because I was in this particular book, I was trying to show different styles. And I know for one of them, I did like a shoujo manga style, where I was really trying to do that. Okay, here we go. Let me see if I can hold this up real close. I would say in like a drawing like this, I'm trying to get it in there.
Oh yeah, we see it. It's nice and clean.
Thank you. I would say that almost doesn't look like one of my own drawings. You know what I mean? I was trying so hard to emulate a classic shoujo published style that for maybe one drawing, I think I can pull it off, maybe, right? But to do a whole narrative story in that style, I don't think I could.
But for the most part, if you can draw, that's one thing I try to tell Irvin them all the time. Look, if you can draw, you have the basic skills, you can do anything.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that I suppose I should give myself a little more credit that if I really wanted to, I suppose I could find an authentic looking way of drawing. I'd have to work hard at it, though. And I suppose in the end, the truth is, I don't want it badly enough. I want my work to look like my own work. It's hard to have the motivation to have it look that much like it was done by somebody, like I said, in Tokyo, in the Japanese manga industry.
But it's also honesty too involved in that. It's funny because we Irvin and them actually got a chance to talk to a Japanese manga creator a couple of years ago, and one of the things he kind of impressed upon us was the fact that, okay, Japan can do Japan great, but Japan can't do America great. So it's okay. Yeah. He's like he kind of impressed upon us, having the manga visual style, there's no problem, but say something different than what Japan says.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so it goes both ways. It goes both ways, and I think probably the grass is greener on the other side.
Maybe. Right.
Say, oh, look what they're doing, man. I wish I could do that. That kind of thing. One thing that we haven't talked about, and I don't know if this falls within the topics that you're interested in, but when it comes to American-made manga, I remember back in the day when I was doing Mickey Falls and sort of first starting to dip my toe into this thing, the fans who took Japanese manga seriously really objected to Americans claiming that their work was a manga, and they felt that only a person born and raised in Japan with Japanese blood, that person can say that they're creating manga, but nobody else. And there was a lot of heated discussion about that issue back then.
Oh yeah, I definitely know that there's that. That's why the name OEL even kind of has, like, to some degree, like a stain on it.
Yeah,
maybe we're trying to take the name back a little bit, but like some people say their work is OEL. Some people call it manga inspired. Some people say what's another thing? American manga, global manga. Like, it's gone under many different titles, many different names. That's why I never want to put anybody in a category for anything. Right. It's like I don't want to offend anybody, but
do you feel that it has mellowed out a little, this sort of argumentation about the use of the word manga, or does that remain as
for sure? But I do think that there is still some people who probably don't consider it, I guess, authentic manga, if we're using like the Tokyo Pop term or whatever, authentic manga. Like I don't think there's everyone still considers it that, but I think because of things like webtoons and a lot of other platforms and stuff, like it's a little bit more accepted than it used to be, from my perspective.
From the animation standpoint, because of stuff like the Last Airbender, I think that's mellowed out things a little bit too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for the Japanese people, in Japan, I think they were delighted to see their style spreading all over the world, and the popularity and people trying to emulate the style. I don't think you saw any Japanese people getting uptight and saying, "Oh, how dare you call your comic a manga?" It was more Americans who got very possessive. And you know how fans of anything, whether it's music or whatever, they tend to get very possessive of this thing that they're so enthusiastic about. So I suppose it's inevitable that you're going to have
hipsters.
Yeah. So, I think you're right that Last Airbender probably played a role in getting people to loosen up a bit and say, "Hey, man, this style can be created by lots of different people, and thank goodness it can, because we're getting some interesting stories out of it."
I know also in the large in the Black community, Boondocks. Definitely.
Boondocks. That was an important one.
Yeah.
When was that first published? Because I feel like that was before Airbender.
Yeah, actually, let's see, Boondocks, was it?
Are you talking about the comic, or are you talking about the show?
Well, I guess I was thinking of the comic, and
the comic is funny because
preceded.
Aaron Magruder been doing that comic in the late '90s for his school paper. I think did he go to Howard? I think he went.
That's what I think. I remember that comic.
So he's been doing it for a minute, and then it got the controversies that it used to take a look at. Started people getting interested. And turning it into animation. So.
Yeah, well, that was a real groundbreaking property for sure, and people need to be aware of that.
Right.
Oh, for sure. Aaron Magruder, if you're watching,
hey, we watch you
on. So my next question is, with obviously, you publishing like Akiko being like the first comic that you really like. I'm gonna say, like as your words, like took seriously and really wanted to kind of get out there.
Yeah.
Did you early on ever try to, or were you interested the way it was, like maybe publishing it in places like Japan, or no? Was it just like, nah, I'm not interested in even it being over there? It's not, that's not the audience for it, or?
Right. Well, the truth is, getting something published in Japan is the dream of so many people.
Right.
But the reality is, the Japanese publishing industry is very, very picky about what foreign titles they're going to take on. Right. And so for me, there was never a question, the way it tends to work with foreign editions, getting my Mastering Manga, for example, published in, Germany or France or whatever. It starts with the country that is going to do the translation, and in particular with a publisher who requests the rights.
Right.
And, pretty much every author, I think they would be crazy if they didn't just say, "Oh yeah, please." I'll never say no to anything. Right. But it starts with them. Right. And if you need to have, I would say, achieved a certain kind of success that lures the attention of people in other countries. But I did actually finally achieve that dream. Here, I'll show you. And it's too bad I should have grabbed a copy, but in the next room I got my Realism Challenge, How to Draw a Book, which of course has nothing to do with manga. It's all about highly realistic drawing styles. This was the one. This was the key that opened the door to Japan, and a Japanese publisher
nice.
Translated that and had it published in Japan. And to me, that felt like a real kind of prize. Now, interestingly, in terms of the timing of this interview, my first narrative graphic novel to be published in Chinese is
great.
about to occur. Lost in Taiwan is the name of that graphic novel. And in Taiwan, a Taiwanese publisher requested those rights, and they have apparently completed. I'm waiting to get a copy in the mail because I'm really eager to see what does it look like translated into Chinese. That is going to be published in Taiwan on December 16th. And I feel that really does, that represents a breakthrough for me in terms of one of my original stories in comic book form being published there in the Far East.
Well, let me ask this question too. To piggyback on that, were you think that the influences of the Taiwanese influence also shows up in a lot of your work? Because I know I'm a big Hong Kong comics fan myself. So.
Oh, okay. Well, Taiwan was the first place in the Far East that I went. I graduated from college, and my first job was teaching English with the YMCA in Taiwan. So in a way, that my first face-to-face impression of Far Eastern culture was Taiwan. So I'm sure that came into my work quite a lot. I carried around a sketchbook, and I was making drawings of the architecture and different things like that. And certainly this book, Lost in Taiwan, was kind of intended to be a love letter to Taiwan in a very direct way. So that one is filled with stuff that's celebrating the culture of Taiwan. But now you've got me wondering if, without my knowing it, if other aspects, the thing that we all have to give credit to Chinese culture for is the Chinese characters, right?
Oh, yeah,
and,
absolutely.
People who are fans of Japan are always referring to kanji and so forth. And I would not blame a Chinese person for getting ruffled feathers a little bit and say, hey, we invented the kanji, you should call them Chinese characters. Don't think that came from Japan. And so, I think I have been endlessly fascinated with Chinese characters from the get-go as I tried. I never became fully literate, but I learned to read and write a little bit. And so that is at the heart of a lot of what I do, that love of the beauty of the Chinese writing system.
Okay. Now, really quick, we're going to not take a break, but we have to make a quick plug-in real quick here. And I'm going to let Mark make this plug-in because Mark will be able to make it better than me for our sister show, The Honeycomb Hideout.
Right. The sister show of Shining Spotlight is the official podcast of Imaginative Workshop. It's Honeycomb Hideout. Joe Kane and Christina are chopping it up and talking about fandom from many different angles and many different maturity levels. And I think there's something that is going to be interesting. A lot of people watch it, so give it a try.
Howard Stern for Geeks, right?
Yeah, Howard Stern for Geeks. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for you guys for that. Now we're back, and now I guess I have a lot of other questions. I'm trying to make sure I'm not like loading you up too much with it.
No, please. I'm enjoying this.
Okay, so narratively, like obviously, one thing I think a lot of people forget about in comics is that, writing is also very important.
Yeah.
But I don't really hear a lot of times people talk a lot about the writing aspect. So where did you gain a lot of your skills? Who are your influences writing wise, where it helped you develop your craft?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a great question. And I agree with you. I think we all are dazzled by the artwork. We tend to focus on that a lot. But the writing is arguably the most important aspect. Without the writing, we got nothing to illustrate, right? And I would say, for me, the influences on my graphic novel writing, some of it came from the American comic industry, like Bone. I was definitely reading that and taking notes. Usagi Yojimbo was another one. And later on, when I got to like Death Note and Full Metal Alchemist, I was learning a lot from those people. But I think for me, and I wonder if this is true of other people, a lot of the you can learn a lot about writing from movies in the sense that, you know, these movie screenplays are like airtight, man. They have worked really hard to have. There's no fat on the bone, right? I mean, it's everything that is in that story is there for a reason, right? And so I know that I've learned a lot from, and when I'm watching a movie, especially a movie I really love, like The Incredibles or Ratatouille or something like that, I'm studying that stuff, and I'm like, why does this scene work so well, and why did he make this choice here and there? And I think that's the key to it, really, in terms of learning about writing, is to move from being just a reader to being almost an analyst. You know, you have to break it down and study and figure out what is it that they're doing that makes this work, right? But yeah, I'm pleased that you asked about that, because when I'm writing a graphic novel, say like a dialogue scene, I'm very focused on getting every line, every word just right, you know. And there's this marvelous give and take between, when you're doing a dialogue scene, between the artwork and the dialogue and the facial expressions, and, you know, where you put those speech bubbles and so forth. That's the real magic of comics, because it's a place where writing and artwork really kind of do this dance together. You don't see anywhere else except possibly children's picture books, like bedtime books, right? That's another one where the artwork and the writing are constantly supporting one another. But you know, comics, I think, is the most sophisticated example of it. And I've always felt, I don't know if anyone's done a study of this, but I've always felt that the reason that reading comics is so delightful is because your brain is being made to switch back and forth with lightning speed between these two different ways of interpreting information visually, and then all those little words, right? And that's using a different part of your brain, but immediately you've got to go back to the visual interpretation. There really is something magical about that. And I can tell you, at least for me, I take the writing every bit as seriously as the artwork.
You know, it's funny because as you're talking, I know Irvin, the wheels are probably turning. He's like, man, that's exactly what you guys say.
Oh no, I was literally going to say that. I was even going to ask about the whole dialogue aspect, because when it comes to dialogue, like we just did a panel last week at YomaCon, and one of the things that, you know, I know Mark and you know, one of our editors in the group, Nick, you know, we're talking about was you know, dialogue and how important dialogue is, and a lot of people ask questions about, you know, how to make their dialogue, improve their dialogue, how to make it sound natural. You know, where it's not sounding cookie cutter, where it's just like you know, something you'll just see out of your standard anime. You know, it actually sounds like two people having a conversation.
Yeah. I think one of the keys that I'm always trying to focus on is making sure that every character has their own way of talking. So that during a dialogue scene, there's 2 or 3 different people speaking. You could almost just have someone read it out loud to you without you seeing, and you would be able to say, "Oh, that's Spuckler, because Spuckler talks like that. Oh, that's Mr. Biba, because Mr. Biba talks completely differently from Spuckler." And so I've carried that down to this day, that I'm always trying to make sure each character has their own style of speaking, and that, you know, maybe one character is going to use the shortest possible sentence, and then the other character is going to use the longest, most elaborate sentence, because they just have they got a different voice, each one of them. So that's something I would focus on. The other thing that I would say is that, you know, you should be writing out your dialogue before you even get to the artwork, anywhere near the artwork, I think. Very often I will write out the full dialogue of a scene that I'm about to start sketching out. But before I get to that, I'm going back, I'm rereading, I'm crossing things out, I'm changing the wording. Oh, that doesn't flow right, you know. Even a simple thing like repeated words. So much of writing comes down to noticing that you accidentally repeated this same word within the same sentence, and that's clunky and, you know, distracting. and just doesn't sound good, right? So you're going back and say, well, I just used that word. I got to find a different way, you know,
Right.
that kind of stuff. So if you've written a thing of dialogue and you haven't scratched things out and changed stuff, I'd say, well, go back and read that a little more carefully, because the really good writing takes place 2 or 3 or 4 different versions of that sentence down the line when you finally have honed it to the best possible line it can be. Now, that being said, once I've written all that out and then I do start to turn it into a comic book page, that's when the artwork comes in and the facial expressions come in, and that's when you need to be prepared to start tweaking things a little, because something that you thought was going to be great when you were just working in text form is not working so well, and the artwork is telling you, no, he should be saying something different. And those of us who write and illustrate our own work are in this privileged position to be able to edit both of them. I'm like, well, I'm going to change that facial expression a little, but I'm going to change this line. And now that I've changed this line, I'm going to have to change that other person's face. You know, we're able to tweak everything almost simultaneously, so that it's supporting the art and the writing are supporting each other and getting to that, lifting it up to that best possible version of the scene.
Right. I often tell these guys all the time, I'm like, you know, the character tells you what they want to say, first of all, right? Because the character, you know, you want to treat the character like you're chronicling what they're saying instead of making them say it.
Yeah, that's true.
But I want that guy to say this.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing. I can give you an example. Now, this isn't from graphic novels, but this is from it's got some comics in it, but this newest project of mine is called The Mighty Onion. Now, The Mighty Onion was heavily influenced by Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I don't know if you know these books. Yeah. They're very popular books. And so in Diary of a Wimpy Kid, you've got this main character who he has no self-awareness, and he thinks that he's doing all the right things. And part of the humor is that he's doing terrible things. And you as the reader are laughing because you understand he's treating everybody badly and so forth. And then he's got this long-suffering best friend called Rowley, who gets pushed around a lot. And so I had sort of tried to create this dynamic with my main character named Elliot, and then he meets this artist character named Pam. Right. And he's going to try to push Pam into doing things his way. Well, the reason I told this story is it's an example of what you were just talking about, Mark, that when I got to writing Pam was not going to be pushed around. She was like, no, I'm not going to let this guy push me around. And so Pam was always pushing back, and she became a drastically different character from what Rowley was, who had influenced that whole thing. And it was almost kind of like she was alive and she was telling me, I'm spunky. I'm not going to be pushed around by anybody.
Look, Mark, really, this isn't how it's going.
Yeah. So I just had to listen to Pam, and she told me what kind of things she was going to say.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so here, I guess I'm also curious about this. With you obviously making it to the point that you've made it so far in the industry, in terms of, you've amassed a lot, following on YouTube, more importantly, with, you've gotten, numerous or nominated for numerous Eisner Awards, and you've, had your books, in terms of like the how-tos kind of spread, across the world. What is the next challenge for you? What does that look like for you?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for all those kind words. And you said early at the beginning that you saw me doing all these different styles, right? And so for me, it's always a matter of trying to take on something new. And with almost every project I do, I'm sort of pivoting away from the last thing I did and forcing myself to try something I never tried before. Now, my latest project that I'm in the middle of right now is going to be the first time that I've really jumped into something that involves the sort of medieval fantasy, like Lord of the Rings style kind of thing. Because all throughout my career, I've been looking at like Harry Potter and different stuff like that, or Game of Thrones or whatever, and saying, well, here's this whole world of storytelling that I've never really delved into. I've never done anything that has, elves or things like that in the story. But I decided to come at it from a different direction, and I've got a main character who actually lives in the real world in a kind of boring, ordinary small town in Ohio, but she loves to go into her fantasy version of her own life, right? And so, I'm not the first person to do a story like this, but it's fun to keep jumping back and forth between the two realities. And this is allowing me for the first time to sort of explore that swords and sorcery world of Lord of the Rings, while also constantly not just keeping my feet on the ground, but almost trying to make the real life story as mundane as possible, so that when she snaps out of her fantasy and she's no longer in this spectacular, J.R.R. Tolkien world that she's been imagining, you get to laugh and realize, oh no, you're not where you thought you were. You're just in ordinary America.
But it's got to be. I was gonna say, it got to be some catharsis in that story too, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And this is another one that's fun for me in terms of creating new characters and kind of creating a team. And she wants to go on a quest, right? She's always wanted to do one of these big quests, and so she imagines she's roped her friends into going on this big journey. But of course, it's all dealing with much more humble things in real life. I'm having a lot of fun with it. And to tell you the truth, I've even got another story in the pipeline that's locked and loaded and ready to go after that. So I've always got something up my sleeve, and there's no shortage of ideas. I think it's a matter of sometimes, can I find the publisher that will go for this idea? That can sometimes become the challenge. But I'm lucky that way, that I'm always sort of, something's always popping into my head, and I'm almost tempted to run after that latest idea that just occurred to me. You know what I mean?
Well, Mark, have you always focused? One thing is that I noticed that you're a strong character guy, right? In terms of your characters, have you always focused on that, or did you stumble at the beginning of your career with that, or how was your process?
Well, I'm pleased to hear you say that. I think I do tend to enjoy the process of bringing those characters to life, particularly by way of dialogue. And I think that when I first started working and coming up with comic book stories, I was not much of a plot guy. And I would make the story up as I went along. When you read these first Akiko stories, the first 18 issues of that series, I was just going by the seat of my pants. I was just making it up. I had no idea, how am I going to resolve this plot line? Are there, because if you want to do a plot twist, that takes, you got to set that up. You got to know, to keep it believable, you need to have laid the groundwork for that plot twist. And so that was something that came a little later on. I feel like by the time I got to Brody's Ghost, I started to understand the importance of crafting a plot that was leading towards everything, building towards this climactic moment of revelation and that kind of thing. But I suppose deep inside, I'm still that guy who loves the characters and loves, especially if I can make it a little comedic. I feel like that's when the characters really become
take
fun.
A little of that tension off sometimes.
That's right. You gotta have fun with it.
Right.
So yeah, and I think in terms of readers almost demand good characters. They're not going to read your story if you have not given them a character that they can deeply care about and become invested in. So I suppose even if it wasn't my natural inclination, I'd have to learn to do it, because that is certainly what readers want in a story.
So, Mark, with conventions are something that I feel like, are pretty big for a lot of like comic book creators. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are watching this right now that probably want to know, like, if they're newer artists, like, hey, when should I go to a con? Are cons important? I don't know as far as, what you're taking conventions on, but clearly, I know that you've been a part of the convention circle at some point, because you and Mark, have met each other at some point. What is your take on, do you think that cons are important for comic creators to be able to succeed in the industry?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question before. And I'm sort of one of the lucky things that happened to me when I signed on with Sirius Entertainment was that they were, especially in the early years, having me go to a bunch of different conventions, and they were arranging all that. And I was not having to like pay for a table or whatever. They were paying for that table, and I was just sitting there and signing books, So I had a marvelous experience of going to San Diego year after year. I think like 4 or 5 years in a row, I got to go to that convention. And as you know, that's just an incredible experience. As the years went on, I kind of went to fewer of those things. But then when I was doing Brody's Ghost and Miki Falls, some of the anime conventions would invite me, like down in Texas, to be there again, sort of signing books and sometimes doing like drawing lessons and things like that. To me, I think the key thing about a comic book convention or anime convention is the social aspect of meeting people and making friends, and because this can be an isolated profession, a writer and an artist. You're by yourself a lot, up inside your imaginary world all day. And so the conventions are your chance to get out there and be with people and sort of strategize and learn from your fellow creators and get advice from them. That's what I always look forward to, whether it's the comic book world or more of like a straightforward authors book fair kind of thing. I love meeting the other creators and sort of comparing notes with them. And those are your co-workers that you kind of don't get to meet as often as you would like to, you know what I mean? So I think that's the real joy of a comic convention. In terms of, is it necessary to succeed in the business? I suppose there are no cut and dried rules in that regard. And some people, especially someone who can make things take off on the internet and build up a huge following that way, somebody like that might not need a convention at all. They got this devoted fan base that they've created online that is going to be there for them. I'm kind of lucky, that periodically, like I got invited, and I'm going to feel bad because I don't know the exact name of it at the moment, but there is an anime convention in Corpus Christi, Texas, coming up in February that they have invited me to attend, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's kind of been a while since the last time I was at a comic book convention of any kind, so it certainly is a delightful benefit. If you can get to one of them, I highly recommend it. It gets you out of the house and out there with real flesh and blood people who you never know. Someone you meet at one of these conventions can clue you into something that you never thought about that could really change your whole life.
Mark, I want to ask you, being from Michigan, as well, it's funny. As I relate to our con experiences, I see a lot of talent here in Michigan, right?
Yeah.
But it's like the talent, because, a lot of our institutions, don't support, teaching this stuff. A lot of the talent is kind of aimless. Have you noticed that? Or, do you have any ideas of how maybe, people on the outside can remedy that? Or...
Yeah, wow, that's an interesting thing you've pointed out there. I do think that it's like you said, there is loads of talent here in Michigan, but you're right that it's because the big conventions and so forth are San Diego and New York City, and I think Chicago even sort of feels like there's more of a thriving scene there, whereas we feel like we're a little bit off the beaten path here in Michigan. And sadly, I'm a terrible person to even give advice because I feel slightly disconnected from the local Michigan scene. It's been a while. There was a convention down in Dearborn that was having me down there a number of years ago, and that was a pleasure running into people. I don't know if you've ever.
That was the old Motor City right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was broken up into two places. Used to be in Dearborn, and then was also at the Novak Convention Center.
Yeah, now see the one in Novak Convention Center, I really should get to that one of those days because that's so near my neck of the woods.
Right.
But even that one, it's been a long time. Back in the serious days, they would they'd set that all up, and I would just show up and sit down and sign those books. Yeah,
I used to sit down there with you and Mark, and with you and Rob, and sometimes Jason would be there. You know, so that's how I got to really kind of know you guys and get to know your work. It's through those days.
Well, see, now, so you're a living example of what I was talking about, the benefits of going to the conventions and being there, meeting people. And those were good times. And I do look back fondly on that sort of social aspect.
We were true believers back then.
Oh, yeah, that's true. We had the whole world spread out in front of us.
Exactly.
Endless possibilities.
Right.
I think here in Michigan, you do have to make that extra effort to get out there and connect with your fellow creatives. I was going to mention Paul Sizer, who is a comic creator.
Yeah,
you know him?
Great dude. Yeah.
In Grand Rapids, I think that's where he is. And it's always a pleasure to see him, and he's real good at, I think, connecting with people.
Okay, real quick, because we're coming up on the last few minutes of the show.
All right.
So we only have time for a couple more questions. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you something that, I guess I'm going to use this time to be able to find out. This is going to sound very weird, right? Very weird.
Nervous.
But the
question:
do you have any rivals? What I mean by that is, like, it doesn't have to necessarily be someone where I'm like, I want to beat this person, but do you have any other contemporary in the industry, basically?
Oh, yes, that's an interesting question, because I have always felt that people who get too competitive when it comes to creative affairs are kind of headed down the wrong road. I feel like it shouldn't be like a race or a competition when it comes to creativity. That being said, there are some people, I think, who almost need to have a rival of some kind, and that can sort of inspire them to up their game. And I think, the rival is the wrong word, but back in the 90s, when I saw what Jeff Smith was doing, or when I saw what Stan Sakai was doing, I was like, man, I got to see if I can learn from them, see if I can get as good as them, not so much in terms of can I surpass, because I don't think that was ever going to be in the cards. I wouldn't be so, I wouldn't go so far as to attempt something like that. But I think certainly looking at other people's work as a source of inspiration and getting you to maybe kick yourself in the pants and work a little harder, I think that is a good thing. And I suppose, there might be an element of positive rivalry in that sort of thing. But I do feel that, especially with young people, there is an unfortunate tendency to compare themselves with other people and become demoralized because they, especially on the internet, I think on the internet especially, people can present themselves as just like an endless string of successes. And we are all looking at these numbers, right? It's like, oh, you got so many likes, and I don't get that many likes. And I think that's an unfortunate thing about the internet, for creative people in particular, is it's given you this sort of gauge, this scale that you feel you're on, and you're like, well, I don't have so many likes, so that means my work isn't good. And nothing could be farther from the truth. People need to make sure that they're not getting too obsessed with that stuff, and remember why you do this to begin with is because you love it. And if you do keep at it, that's when you start to gradually build that audience. And maybe if you're lucky, you eventually do get those numbers. But it's really shouldn't be about that. It should be mostly about your love of it. And I'll tell you, when I look back on my career, and it's been about 30 years now, I just feel that being able to do this for a living is its own reward. I feel like I won the jackpot to be able to do this as my job. And, in terms of making loads of money or winning loads of awards or having my books turned into movies, and kind of none of those things have happened, to be quite honest. I'm like, forget about all that stuff. I got to draw pictures and write stories every day for the last 30 years. I won just being able to do that. That is a privilege and something that you should never forget about. And you got to learn to count your blessings and be appreciative of the good things you've already got.
I tell these guys all the time, I'm like, hey, man, I'm going to get to a point in your life where you pinch yourself and say, I can't believe they paid me for this.
Yeah.
You do say that.
Amen. That is exactly the attitude to have.
All right. Well, I guess we'll ask the final question, the traditional question that we ask everybody. And you kind of answered a little bit of this earlier, but I'm going to kind of see if I can rephrase it a little bit, see, what you think. At the end of your career, when you kind of look back, at everything, what is your end game? Is, like Avengers Endgame, you kind of got that. What's your end game? What do you see? How do you want it to all end?
Wow, boy, that's one of the toughest questions I ever been asked. Because in a funny way, I am still that guy who's making it up as he goes along. You know what I mean? And I don't have that big final goal. In a funny way, I don't want to know too much in advance what I'm heading toward. I want life to still hold its surprises for me. Right. But for sure, I think the important thing for me will always be that I'm trying something that I have not tried before. I'm heading off in some new direction. And I would love if my, final project is something that everybody looks at and is almost scratching their heads and saying, "Oh, I can't believe Crilley would end up doing something like this." A completely different thing from all this stuff that he's been doing over the years. Like, for example, one thing that I've always wanted to try to do is a work of nonfiction, because I love reading nonfiction, but I have never created a work of nonfiction. And in a funny way, I feel like I'm searching around to find that story, whether it's a biography of a real person or a real event. I suppose, to answer your question, that would be the one thing I hope I do before my time runs out, is to create a graphic novel that is a work of nonfiction.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for coming on today. We really appreciate your time and all the questions that you've answered today. Really quick, can you let everybody know where they can find you, where they can, where all of your projects are? Can you just talk a little bit about that real quick?
All right. Well, if you can go to markcrilley.com, I got my links there that can take you to all the different social media. And that's probably the best thing. I mean, in terms of my largest internet presence, far and away, it's got to be YouTube. And if anybody watching this by chance, if you haven't seen any of my YouTube videos, you got a big mountain of them waiting for you.
All good stuff, though. All good stuff.
Oh, thank you. YouTube.com/Mark Crilley. How to draw videos and how to write videos. And I'm so glad that one or two of your questions was related to writing, because that does tend to get overlooked. And I made sure that I had, I would say 10 or even 20 different videos that are focusing on that, the storytelling aspect of it, and specifically dialogue and all that good stuff. So, yeah, I suppose those are the two places I would have people go to.
Okay, well, we'll make sure we put links to that down below. We're going to go ahead and close out right now. Real quick, though, I do want to say, Mark, if you can hang on just for a quick second once we close, I would appreciate that. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. We do have more interviews coming up for the rest of the season. I believe this is episode 9, so we have at least 3 more episodes coming up in this season. So make sure you guys look out for those. Make sure you look out for Origami Super Punch. We're going to have those available online coming up very soon. So I know you guys have been waiting for that, but please be patient. That's an anthology project we've been working on. With that being said, thank you again, Mark, for coming on. Thank you, Mark Dudley, for co-hosting. Obviously, the legendary Mark Dudley. And with that being said, we will see you guys later. Thank you.